Hey, what's up? My name is Chris and welcome to Coding in Public. This is the second video in this series on creating your own Google Calendar event page using the Google Calendar Event API. We're just pulling all this data in live, and last time we just set up the environment. So even if you missed it, you haven't missed much, you can jump right in with us in video 2 here. You just make sure to go to the GitHub link in the description and grab lesson 2 starting point, and then you can download the code here or you can clone it and get started right away with us. All you'll have to do is open up your local terminal here. I've got mine open in VS Code and type npm I, and that will install all the dependencies. And then you can type npm run dev, and that will spin up a dev server with Vite, which is exactly where we are, so you haven't missed anything. Okay, so I've got this up over here. What we're going to do is this video is go ahead and style out basically how everything's going to look. And then in the next video, we'll worry about actually getting the Google Calendar event API data ready to go. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and remove this app div because that was used by Vite as a default. And then let's change the title here to something like Google Calendar event page. All right, now inside of here is where we're going to write all of our HTML and our Tailwind classes. Now the way Tailwind works, it's a low-level utility framework. I've got the docs open right here, and you can see that basically what you're doing is writing classes for each individual CSS property. Now at first that sounds like a lot of extra work, and it sounds like it'll mess up your HTML a lot. Just a couple quick notes on that. Number one, it is a little bit of work to kind of figure out how it works, but it's really meant for people who already understand CSS. And so if you understand CSS, probably what you think the different classes are is what they are. So they're pretty kind of intuitive, and you can quickly look up anything with Command K on their site here, and it'll just pull up this little palette and you can start typing. And once you kind of get a taste of how it works, I'm sure there's better ways than what I'm doing here, but at least it was fairly easy to figure out. It's also really meant for more component type builds. So whether that means you're using some kind of JavaScript framework or even a static site generator that allows you to have components or snippets or however they define it, writing it once for some kind of component and then just referencing that component whenever you need to add one to the page means you're really only writing these classes one time, and then it's basically built in ready for you to use anywhere all throughout your site. And believe it or not, exports of Tailwind are usually way smaller than whatever you're custom writing, just because we tend to kind of write the same things over and over again, which makes sense. You're going to have a lot of things that are display of flex. So having a low-level utility framework can help a lot with that. We're going to actually customize Tailwind just a little bit as we work through this, but I just want to kind of expose you to how you might use it. I still think it's no replacement for CSS, and obviously you need to know how to write that really to get the most out of Tailwind anyhow. All right, so let's come to the body, and this is actually where we're going to add some of our default stylings. So we're going to start by just typing class, obviously, and then inside here, we're going to start with a background color for the site. So what I want is for it to be background, that's BG Slate, and you can see here I've got a Tailwind IntelliSense extension, and it's just showing me all the different options for slate coloring. I'm going to choose this first one, and then let me open the sidebar, and let's just search for Tailwind, and I'll have a link to this in the description, but this is the one I'm using, the one put out by Tailwind Labs. Okay, so I'll close that down here, and then let's come back over this way. Now, if I save this and jump over this way, technically it is a different color than white, but it's just barely different. You can see that's the preview right there. But we can actually add a dark theme one too with just the prefixed dark colon in front of it. So for dark, we're going to say we want it to be slate of 700. And now if I switch my machine here to dark mode, you're going to see that that's the color it gets, which is nice to be able to just quickly write both the light and dark mode right there from the HTML. All right, let's toggle back on light mode, and then we're going to go ahead and add a few things here just to kind of place out things where we want them on the page. So I want a padding of 4 around everything, and as you can see in the IntelliSense here, that's 16 pixels. And then, just like we did with dark, you can declare different screen sizes. So for medium, I would like that to move to 6, and for large, I would like that to move to padding of 8. And that's 8 all the way around, or 32 pixels all the way around. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. And nothing much changes since we don't really have any content on the page, but let's get up a few other things kind of set up, and then we'll start adding content. So I'm going to say I want it to be a minimum height of screen, and as you can see in the IntelliSense there, that means 100 view height. And then I do want this to be grid, and I'll show you how we're going to kind of do this in a second. But I want a grid gap here of 4 rem on small, a gap of 6 on medium, and a gap of 8 on large. And you can see how we're just kind of mirroring those paddings on the outside with the gap or the spacing between the elements in the page on the gap. All right, lastly, let's set some kind of global defaults for the text color. So we're going to say text, and I also want this to be slate here, and we'll say slate of 600 for the default, and then on the dark mode, we're going to say text slate, and we want this to be 100. All right, so we're going to add one more thing here in a little bit, but for now, let's go ahead and just save that and start working on the actual content so we can kind of see how this will actually work in real life. All right, next I have a header, and I'm going to go ahead and just use Emmet this time to show you that you can do it even a little bit faster. I want everything to be text center here, and then I want it also to be a grid with padding of 4 on all screen sizes, and I want to place items center. All right, so let's expand this out, and inside here I want two things. I want a heading 1, and this will have text 3XL, and then on small screen sizes, I want it to be a text of 5XL. Now you might be asking, why are you making it small bigger? Well, actually, this original one over here is for the very small screen size, and small I think is like 500 or something, I forget, but it's a step up. I just want it to be a little bit larger. I want this to be font of bold, and then I want it to be a background clip text, and what I'm going to do is have a gradient on this text, and then I want it to say text transparent, and then I'm going to add another class called background gradient to BR or bottom right, and then I want a padding bottom of 4 to give extra padding on the bottom between this and the little slider we're going to add, and then on medium, a dot medium here, I want the padding bottom to move to 6, and I want that gradient to move from blue 500 to violet 700, and on dark, I want that to be from blue 400. All right, I realize that's a lot of text, but here when I hit enter, it'll all expand out. And I just want this to say my calendar events. If I save that there, you can see now what we've got is a background clip text with the transparent text here, and then the background gradient of the text from blue 500 to violet 700. And on dark, technically it's a little bit lighter of a blue, and you can see that when I switch over here. All right, so we've got that set up now. Now below that, we've got another section, and that's going to have two things. It'll have a label and an input. In fact, if I switch back to this one, you can see this is what we're working on now. So we just built this out. Let's now add this label and then add this input slider so that they can adjust how many events they're pulling in. So back over this way, this is still inside the header. I'm going to want this as a label here, and this time let's set it for the event amount. Will be the ID we associate that with, and this will say events to show. Now I don't actually have any classes on this because all my text colors are actually inherited from the body, and then let's see, I don't think I have anything. I guess the text of center here would be pulled down into the label as well. All right, next I've got an input here. Here I will have some classes. We're going to have accent blue 600. This is new with Tailwind. You can add accent colors for the screens that support this or the browsers that support this. And then I do want a cursor of grab just so people can know that they can grab and slide this. All right, now type, I want this to be a type of range, and I need this ID to be the same as above, so event amount here. And then for the range here, I do need to give it a couple of values. So the smallest I want it to go to is 1, and then the default value will be 9. And then the max value will be 20. So I'm saying how many events they can pull in here. So when they drag that slider, I'm making sure that I'm always getting these increments and can then query our endpoint that we're going to set up. All right, so let's go ahead and save that, and that should pop up here. Now you see it's just spreading all the way across here. We'll fix that here in just a second. Now there's two ways we need to fix that. When we add the cards below, we're going to need this section, the header, and the card section to actually not share equal space. We'll take care of that in a second, but for now we can actually come in here and add another property called content center, and that's the same as align content center. And now within this grid child, everything is forced to the center, and that's what we want. All right, so let's go ahead and come down here, and below the header, we're going to have another section, and this will be our main tag here where all the main content lives. And here I do want to actually set a max width of 6XL, but as much as possible, I want the width to be full. And then in the X direction, I want there to be auto margin both ways. Now I'm going to have a section inside here with a class of grid, and then gap 4. We're going to mirror the same thing we did above. Gap 6 on mediums, and then for large. And then I'm going to set one property for the children of this grid, which would be items start, which is align items start. So it's going to start all those cards at the top rather than them forcing them to stretch the full width of whatever else is on their row. Finally, I need to add an ID on here. We're going to add an ID of events container. Now what's happening here is everything's snapping up. Let's go ahead and open the dev tools here to show you. If I come in here, I've got two sections here, the header, and then I've got the main tag right here. And they're basically sharing equal space right now, aside from this is taking up a little bit more because it's actually got content. And I don't actually want that to happen. So we're going to fix that in a second. Let's go ahead and add one card first, and then we'll basically fix the spacing vertically, and then we'll also figure out how to stack these cards automatically with grid. Now these are all going to be articles, and let's go ahead and just expand this out. I'm going to add a class in here. And what I want is background white for the articles themselves. And then on the dark, I actually want it to be slightly darker than our dark background. So we had a slate 700 there. Let's do slate 800 here. And then let's add a shadow. We're going to do shadow XL. And you can see there kind of the defaults even in IntelliSense as I'm showing you that. And you can actually now set colors for the shadow as well in Tailwind 3. So I'm going to set that as slate 200. And then for the dark, I would want the shadow slate of 800. So it'd be the same basically as the background color of each of these cards. Now I do want this to have a rounded large class as well on it, which gives it a border radius around the whole thing. So now I've got that set. Let's go ahead and save this, and let's jump back to the live example here. We're building these out right here, and now I need to build a section here for this date area that we're going to have. Then the rest of it will live in a section right here, and we're going to use grid to lay this out and kind of space these things out as we need. So let's come in here and add that top part first. So I'm going to add a div here with a class of P3, so padding 3 all the way around. We'll just have a light shadow on it. And on this little section here, let's have a background indigo of 500. And then I want the text here to be text indigo of 50. Now I don't need to actually change this in dark mode because it'll still have that purple color behind it. So this text should look just fine. Next, I want all the text to be uppercase, and then I want it to have a class of grid here to make it a grid parent, and then we're going to place items center, and then I want rounded top LG, so it'll match the top rounding of the card that it sits in. Now inside here, we're going to have two different elements. We're going to have the February, as you can see here over on the right, and then whatever the date is. So I want this to be a text SM here, so text of small, and then let's just say like Feb or something like that. It's already capitalized because of the parent inheriting that, or inheriting the uppercase from the parent. Then I also below here want the text itself of the actual date. So we'll do XL or 3XL and then font bold. And here let's say something like February 3rd. So if I save this and jump over this way, yeah, there we go. So it's now showing up just fine. So that's what we want. I guess let's kind of take a quick look at this. We've got some different colors we're going to add. We are going to add this little drop-down section that we'll have to add some JavaScript to interact with that, and then a button. So that's kind of the sections we're adding. You can see we've got a hover state here as well that we need to worry about. All right, let's jump back over here. And now let's move below that kind of top section. We're still inside the article card itself, but everything else here is going to live inside a div, and it's going to have a class of padding 4 all the way around. And then for medium, we'll have padding 6. This is kind of mirroring the outside as well to kind of keep all that spacing consistent. That is one of the things you get with something like Tailwind, is that you get more consistent spacing because you're not making these things up arbitrarily. And if you don't take the time to set up a project correctly, then it's easy to just kind of guess at random sizes, and then things don't look consistent. So I've added some grid gaps on here, and I've added it as a grid parent itself. And inside here, we're going to have basically a couple different sections to kind of decide what things are stuck together and what things have that spacing, the grid gap of 4 or grid gap of 6 on it. So the top section here, I'm going to have another div with a class of grid, and then just a gap of 1 to keep things pretty close in this top section. We're going to have a paragraph here with text slate 400 for the text color, and then text size of small. And this will just say something like, let's say like Feb 13 through Feb 16, and I'll expand that all out. And then I'll come down here and grab an H2. We're going to say font bold, and then text of 2XL. Now inside the H2, we do actually want them to be able to click on it and access the link that we're going to have. So let's add a link here, and we'll just for right now point this nowhere because we don't have anywhere yet for the event itself. And then inside here, we'll say something like really cool event, and we can fill that in later, obviously. Okay, so you can see it's kind of taking shape nicely, which is great. Now, just below this H2, we're going to have basically an optional section for a description because some events will have a description and some events will not. But for now, let's go ahead and just add it as if every card has it, and we can decide later in the JavaScript basically when to show it and when to hide it. So we're going to add another div here with a class of grid and a gap of 1. So these things will stay stuck together again. And then we are going to have this little drop down section for all of these, and this actually needs to be a button, and that will give us some keyboard navigation automatically and some other things. So let's come over here and let's add a button here, and this will have a class of text slate 400, so the same color as our event length, and then we're going to set this to flex and then gap 1. Now I want the items to be centered, and I want it to have a cursor of pointer. And inside here, I need to have two things. I need to have the text that says see details and then that SVG. Now, before we get going too far, whenever you have a button like this, it is helpful to kind of add a couple things because it's going to be interacting with another section. So the first thing I need to have is aria expanded here, and this needs to be equal to false because eventually we're going to toggle this to true when it expands the section below. And then next, I need an aria controls, and then we need to actually point this to the ID of the section that it controls, which will be a sibling of the button here. So for now, let's just say it controls details 1. And then I'm going to give it an ID, and the ID here will be button of 1. That will interact with the section below because we're going to point aria labeled by to this ID. And again, we're pointing aria controls here to the ID of the next section. You'll see that here in just a second if that doesn't make sense. Okay, let's scroll down here. And then I need to add two things in here. Like I mentioned, we're going to have a paragraph with a text slate 400 here and pointer events of none, just to make sure nobody's clicking the text, that they're only ever clicking the button. And this will just say see details. Next, we've got an SVG, and I actually just grabbed this, I think, from Hero Icons, which is actually made by the makers of Tailwind. And this was something down, I think like caret down, chevron down. There we go. So I'm just going to copy that out and paste that in there. You'll notice a few things here. You'll see actually that I've got Tailwind classes already styling the height of this. I actually am going to change these. So let's change these both to 4 in the height and 4 in the width. Then I'm going to add a couple other things. I do also want pointer events of none on here so that they're not clicking the SVG, only ever the button. And then I also am going to add a transition on here. So we'll say transition. And I can use this Tailwind transition of transform to control the speed and style of that. Now, by default, it has a stroke of current color, which means it's going to take the color of the parent, which is right here, this text slate. And that reminds me, I don't need this one either because the paragraph should be interpreting or pulling that down from its parent. Okay, so that's actually the button. Let's save this and jump back over this way. And now you see that section there. Right below it is where we're going to add the section that the button expands. So likewise, this section is going to be a grid and then a gap of 1, so the smallest amount possible. I will have an ID on here, and this will be my details 1, like we had up above. And then let's go ahead and just expand this out. Eventually, sometimes with MA, it just gets a little messier. So let's say here, aria labeled by, and we're going to point this back to the ID of the button, which was button 1. Now inside here, we're going to have a paragraph with a class of text slate 400. And this can just be like lorem, I don't know, 50 or something like that. So we'll add that in there, and you can see now it shows up down below. So we're going to use this button to interact with this section. And because we pointed to each other using these aria attributes now for assistive technologies and other things like that, it'll help us to basically connect those two. All right, I think that's mostly there. We've just got one final section, which is the button itself. Now this is the actual div. This is the container for all this section. So below here, I believe, is where I need to add this next section. Actually, I think it's maybe one more. All right, so in here, I'm going to add just a link tag here. And we're going to point this to nowhere in particular right now, but I do need several classes on this. We're going to start with the background. Let's see, violet, what was that? Indigo, I think. We'll do indigo of 500, so it's the same as the upper section there. And then I do want rounded, medium, and then we're going to have px4, so padding on the side of 4, and then padding up top of 2. And then I want the text as well to be my indigo, and we'll do indigo of 50. I want this whole thing to have a shadow of 2XL, so a really big shadow on it. And I want the shadow to be the same. So it'll be the indigo of, let's do something like 200 maybe. All right, so let's go ahead and save that for now. And you can see, I don't know if you can barely see that shadow. Let's add some text. We'll say view event. Okay, so there it is. So there's a big shadow kind of below that. But when I switch to dark mode, I actually want to just take the shadow off entirely. I think it looks better without one. So I'm going to say shadow of none. Next, let's add text center here to add the text in the center of that button. And then let's say font bold. Okay, now I mentioned we're going to have a transition here when we hover over everything. So let's go ahead and add those now. And in Tailwind, you can just do that with the hover class like that, and then a colon. So just like kind of dark mode. Let's give ourselves a little more space. It's hard to see a whole lot what's going on. Okay, let's come back up here, hover here, and then let's say shadow of none. And then I do want a ring around the whole thing all the time, and the ring offset to be 0. And then the ring color here is going to be our violet, and let's do 500 as well. So if I save here, you're going to actually see this color here. Oh, and this wasn't violet, this was indigo. So I've actually got a ring around this. Now, if I come in here and focus on this, oops, there we go. You see I've got now an orange ring around it. I kind of want to get rid of that. So I'm going to say focus outline of none. Now you shouldn't do this unless you replace that default behavior with something else. So we're going to say focus ring offset 2. So now when we come in here and focus, it'll actually pull that off a little bit so you can definitely see it, but now it's themed and it looks like the button itself. Now to make all that a little bit more tasteful, let's add a transition here. And I'm going to just do transition of all because I'm changing the offset. I'm also changing the shadow and all that. So let's go ahead and pull this off. And now you can see it just slowly kind of fades in and out. All right, so we're going to call that good for this card itself. What we need to do is copy this down a bunch of times. So let's take this here and let's just hold Command Shift or Option Shift and the down arrow and add a bunch of those events. All right, so you see them all stacking up there now. Now I've just got them set out in a grid container. And I see something here. I'm not getting a roundedness on this. So before we do anything else, let's figure out that. Let's see, article, shadow XL. Oh, I put the dot rounded right here. So let's search for this everywhere. So let's come over here and search for that. There it is. So I'm going to grab all of this. And then if I hit Command Shift L, it'll select every single one on the page. And then I know that I've got cursors in all those points. So now I can just move that, and then that should fix it on all the cards. Let's see. Yep. Okay, so cool. Now, how do we actually get it to lay out next to each other as like, you know how you can do like auto fit with grid and actually have the browser decide where the cards go? So we need to figure that out. So let's go ahead and do that. So if you come over here, we can look up grid template columns. We're looking for like the repeat auto fit, and you see it's not there. Okay, so what can you do? Well, you can change it at each breakpoint if you want to do that. But if you really want it to be like the whole auto fit thing, you can actually come and add that yourself using grid template columns here and extending the default Tailwind configuration. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to open this up over this way. And you see here, what we're going to do is just add this into the extend section. And let's delete all of this. And what we're going to do is replace this here with our own. So we can call it whatever we want. I think I'm going to call this cards. And then all I have to do is come over here and actually add whatever CSS I want. So I want it to be auto fit, and then min max. We'll have 250 pixels and then 1 fraction. So if I save that, I can jump back over here and let's see, let's grab the section that holds it all. So we've got the main tag that's setting our actual width, and then this is the grid parent. So what I want to do is come in here, and now I can just say grid calls. And remember, now I've got cards available to me. If I save that, come back over this way, now they're stacking up nicely using that default CSS. And I can just move all these around, which is really cool. All right, now let's actually look at one other thing. Let's delete some of these. So let's delete that one and that one and that one. And then let's go ahead and expand this out. And you're going to see one other trouble, and that is that these are basically trying to take up equal amounts. And so this isn't staying to the top. And even if I push it to the top of its own grid section, then this will just be to the top of its, and there'll still be kind of weird spacing. So what I actually want is an auto row for this first one, and then the rest to be just 1 fraction to take up all the rest of this main tag. So let's go ahead and figure out how to do that as well. So let's come back here. We're going to do very much the same thing. We're going to look at grid template rows. And as you look through here, there's none that match that. So we're going to add our own defaults as well here. So let's grab all this, come back to Tailwind, and let's add this in here as another option. And again, I'll remove the kind of default examples. We'll just call this auto 1 or something like that. And then all we're going to add here is auto and 1 fraction. All right, so if I save that, we jump back over this way, and that was the body itself. That was actually the grid parent, I think, for both of those. So here I can just come in here now and say grid rows, and you can even see IntelliSense knows that I've got that there. So I'll hit auto 1. And now if you come back over here, these all stay stuck to the top. This section will only ever take up what it needs, and then the rest will be filled by these cards, even if there's only 1 or 2 or whatever. I've got the cursor showing properly there. I've got the colors and the cursor showing properly down there. All those effects working well. These buttons are ready to go. So we're going to call this section of the video series done. And you might remember that we've got different colors. We're going to figure all that out actually with our JavaScript. So we'll do that later and just randomly assign those colors as they fetch different events. All right, if you don't want to miss the next video where we actually create the endpoint, then make sure you subscribe, like this video, and I will catch you next time. Thanks for watching. Happy coding.